Joining me now via the miracle of modern telecommunications is Mr. Sid Meier. Hello.
Hello. Great to be here.
I'm hopefully right in presuming you're speaking to me from Canada today?
No, I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, the home of Firaxis Games.
I didn't know whether you were, in fact, I was presuming that you were living in Canada these days, but...
the tempting prospect, but I've got work to do.
So, you've given me the perfect lead into my first question, which is the classic, really. What are you working on right now?
I'm working on some really cool stuff that I probably can't talk about. Firaxis is going strong. We are working from home. We're working on some really great projects. And you're making the best of these current times. It's about all I can tell you at the moment.
Oh, that's fair enough.
Stay tuned.
Do you get to split your time much between Firaxis projects and personal projects these days?
I like making games, and Firaxis is about games. So most of my time is working on Firaxis stuff. Now, I do get a little more latitude, perhaps, than some other folks. So there's some more experimental stuff, but it's all involved with gaming and strategy and having fun.
So with talking about sort of passion projects, I suppose, are you the sort of person who compulsively begins new projects and feels them out and sees where they go? Or are you very much a one thing at a time sort of fellow?
I'm easily distracted, I guess you would say. Yeah, I have a lot of different ideas, prototypes, concepts, kind of on my hard drive. And if I have an idea for something, I'll pull it up and see what happens. So I'm generally focused on kind of one thing at a time, but that, month to month, that might change or whatever. So a little bit of both, I would have to say.
Can you think of, if you had to identify one project that you suspect you'll never finish, but you would love to if the right idea came along? There's got to be something on your hard drive, right, it's just one solution short of being workable, and you don't know if that will ever come, but if it did, that would be a treat.
Yeah, I think that has to be the dinosaur game. We talk about that a little bit in the book, that it was a project that I was sure was going to be awesome. And even after the third attempt at it, I was still sure it was going to be awesome. But I kind of never figured out that exact, way of approaching it, genre, rules, etc. That was as fun as it really needed to be. So still waiting for that last idea to come along. So hopefully someday. But that is kind of the one project that got away.
Well, you're really doing my work for me here, because one of the big things I had underlined to speak to you about after looking through your book was dinosaurs. Do you agree that for something that's so universally beloved as a theme, they are criminally underrepresented in games? And I know, so many games have got generic dinosaur like enemies, but proper dinosaur games are pretty few and far between, are they not?
I would agree, criminally underrepresented. I was trying to take kind of a strategy game approach to it. I think, kind of the action version is pretty straightforward, but I guess what I found interesting about that project in hindsight was how we tried to apply these various genres to the topic. And it's kind of always part of the design process is figuring out, what genre is this game going to fall into? Is it, we tried strategy, take the Civ model, turn-based dinosaur game. That didn't quite work. And we said, what about our RTS? What about a real time? Wouldn't that be cool? Not as cool as we thought it would be. How about a card game? It can be a card, dinosaur cards. There was a series of stamps that the post office put out with these beautiful dinosaur pictures. And you could just imagine a card with each one of those photographs on it. And so we tried the card game model, and that was close, but not a little too close to Magic the Gathering, as it turned out.
Right, yeah. They've got a few dinosaurs themselves.
There you go. It was interesting to me the way genres and topic kind of intersect, and how each genre kind of pulls out a different aspect, or kind of encourages you to take a different approach to the topic. And the one thing we didn't kind of try was action, because at the time, the graphics were somewhat limited, and I really wanted this kind of evolutionary approach, and almost to build your own dinosaur kind of. I thought that would be key. It's always fascinating how varied and diverse dinosaurs were, and imagine you could invent your own unique dinosaur. And I think the technology was really not up to it at that point. So it was a kind of a glorious failure is the way I look at it. And, might be fun to revisit that someday.
Remind me, was this pre or post Jurassic Park?
It was probably pretty much around that time. That's a great question. I think it overlapped in a lot of ways, and that was almost like an encouragement, a sign from the movie gods that I was on the right track, and unfortunately it didn't turn out that way. But yeah, it was Jurassic Park. There was another dinosaur movie, and the Jurassic Park kind of, in addition to being a really fun movie, kind of pushed graphics forward in movies. And I think it was a time when there was this whole talk about computer games looking more and more like movies, and this synergy between the two types of entertainment. And so it felt like the right time and the right topic, just was that close, but didn't quite get it done.
I don't want to knock the Civilization series, but I kind of want to live in the alternative universe where, we just had a retrospective on 25 years of Sid Meier's dinosaur theme park manager. Like, I think I could live with that. So looking at combining topics and genres, which you just talked a little bit about, I'd like to sort of start us in general at the beginning of your career, and ask if there were any games you worked on, because a lot of the games I know you for, you've been the sort of the creative lead on, but I'm wondering if there are games that you worked on which had topics or genres totally outside your wheelhouse, and what kind of creative challenges that threw up?
Well, in my mind, in the early days, we really hadn't invented genres yet, which was almost a freeing kind of thing. And the early games that I worked on, I did a top-down car racing game. I did a number of flight simulator games, submarine game, kind of hex-based strategy games, NATO Commander, etc. Pirates, which was kind of adventure, but kind of action, and kind of strategy, and kind of role-playing. And we didn't have to fit into little boxes in those days. It was kind of like whatever suits the topic, give it a try. So I think we were able to experiment with a lot of different what ended up being genres, but we didn't think of them as genres at the time. We just thought of them as fun ways to bring this topic to life. So I guess I had the freedom to try and experiment with a lot of different genres, and I think as kind of things went forward, I felt comfortable in a number of them. So when Civ came along and Pirates came along, it was like we're not in a little box. It could be real time, or it could be turn based. I'm kind of comfortable with each of those ideas, or it could be broad strategy, or it could be real time action. I've done a little bit of each of those. So when we did Civ, it ended up the turn based worked, and later we did Gettysburg, and that felt like it needed to be real time. So kind of having some early experience in these various genres, I think, kind of gave me a richer toolkit to work with.
So topic, I suppose, is the other half of that question. I think I've probably inferred from your work that you're quite into history. I don't know, a wild guess. But I mean, for example, like Formula One, is that something you're into, or was that just what was on the table at the time?
That was, we didn't have the legal license rights to that name. But that was an early attempt to really exploit one of the technologies of the Atari 800, which were called player missile graphics, and it allowed us to do some kind of cool things on the screen. And it was one of the very, very first games that I made, and it was a lot about experimenting and learning. But I thought, it was a cool topic for a game. And I guess as a child, I was interested in whether it was pirates or history or Civil War or submarines or airplanes. Those are all, I think, topics that as a kid you could get into, and then as an adult, I can bring my game design ideas and depth and strategy, and kind of bring it to life with a little more substance. But that enthusiasm and that kind of, hopefully the first 10 minutes of the game brings you back to your childhood and about why pirates are cool, or why airplanes are fun, or why submarines are neat. So it's that combination, of a childhood enthusiasm with a kind of an adult ability to add depth and strategy that makes a good game, I think.
So Pirates, one of my favorites. We've seen a remake of. What game would you take from your back catalogue? And if you could throw any resource at it and just have it made like that, what would you go back to and redo? Not just with today's technology, but with the design experience you've got now as well.
There are a couple, I guess, that I think are hidden gems. Covert Action was an attempt to do storytelling combined with action with mystery, and I thought that was a neat idea. It didn't totally come together, but in fact, we have the Covert Action rule, which is something that we try to avoid, which is to kind of have too many different pieces kind of competing with each other in a game. But there was code breaking and car chases and breaking into buildings and solving electrical circuits, and all wrapped in a adventure story about a evil organization trying to do something dastardly that you had to kind of race to resolve. So it sounds like it could be a cool game.
That sounds pretty good.
Perhaps with today's technology and a little more mature game design, that could be interesting. I've been, your question is interesting, but it's been actually I've had the luxury of seeing games like Civilization or Pirates or Railroads kind of have a long lifetime, beyond the first iteration, and see them grow and be nurtured by other designers and kind of have this really fascinating life of their own. And it's so gratifying to see Civ still out there, still being played, still being appreciated by our fans. And so there are a few games I could still be interested in reviving, but on the other hand, I'm very gratified that some of them have had this very long lifetime.
I'm really interested by what you said about your, did you call it the Covert Action rule, of sort of not having too many moving parts? Because I don't know, going back to Pirates, that was the different, the really different things in play in that game was one of the things that made it so exciting to me. And it can. I think the more moving parts you have, the more you risk a clash between them. But I think it can work really well to have a lot of disparate elements in the game. Where do you stand on that rule today? Is that something you're still tempted by, or?
I think it's there. There's also the Pirates rule, which is how to do it right. The problem with Covert Action was that some of the action sequences were so intense that you lost the thread of what the mystery was, what was going on, and at that level. And we now talk about the center of gravity, that the game has to have a center of gravity. It's all well and good, and it's actually often great to have both a strategy element and an action element. I think XCOM is a good example of that as well. But there's got to be a center of gravity somewhere where that's where you spend your mental, where you create the mental image of what's happening in this world. And then in Pirates, for example, there's sword fights and ship battles and things, but they're kind of quick and self-contained. So you don't lose the thread of where was I going, why was I going there, what was what was my purpose. Whereas in Covert Action, the action sequences took longer and they were kind of more intense. And by the time you came out of sneaking through this building and amassing all these clues, often you'd be like, what was the problem I was trying to solve again? And so it kind of, the center of gravity shifted back and forth in ways that kind of were not fun to try to keep in your mind at the same time. So, I think identifying the center of gravity is something we talk about whenever we're looking at a game idea with both, an action component and a strategy component. And, Pirates, we think, is a good example of that, where the center of gravity was clearly in your career and what you were doing in that world. And the action sequences were interludes that didn't take you out of that world or kind of, cause you to forget what you were up to pirate-wise.
So, I mean, XCOM, you mentioned, is when you said that, I thought, well, the center of gravity there is clearly the tactical battles. But then I thought about what you were saying, and I guess by definition, it's the geoscape. But the core XCOM experience, I mean, the geoscape layers it's a solid management, sort of broader strategy game, but it's that tactical action that people think of immediately when they think of XCOM. So I don't know, maybe I presumed. Where's the center of gravity for that game?
We would believe the center of gravity of XCOM is in the tactical. That is where you invest your brain entirely. And then the strategy kind of sets you up quickly for the next tactical engagement. So you're not trying to keep an entire complex world in your head in the strategy level. You are preparing for the next tactical engagement. You see kind of what the consequences are. The story evolves, it goes to the next chapter, and then so we would in our philosophy, we would believe that the center of gravity was the tactical, and the strategy supports that.
I feel vindicated now because my impulse was right rather than my reasoned answer. So
that's right. Go with your gut. Go with your gut.
Let's. I want to go back to science fiction in a minute, but to set that up, I guess I want to talk about your fascination, as I've already alluded to, with history, and why, beyond it just being interested in the discipline, you think that's such a fertile ground for games. And what are the moments in history or the themes in history? I guess I'm asking how they became game ideas for you. What are the bits of history that jumped out to you and made you think this should be a game? And how did that translate into coming up with the first design principles?
I think we realized probably around the time of Pirates and Railroads, that Railroad Tycoon, that allowing the player to create their own story was a new element to games that made them richer, deeper, and more compelling than perhaps some of the let's blow some things up games. So the idea was to give the player a bunch of tools, but not tell them exactly what they were to do with them or what the specific narrow path was they would need to follow it, or et cetera. Let them create their own story, find their own path. And in history, we have the advantage that these tools are familiar, whether it is building railroad track and bridges and carrying cargo from one place to another. The value of those, the usefulness of those, and the purpose of those things is kind of already known. We don't have to explain the world you're entering into and what these different pieces might do or be good for. And so using history kind of as a common language, common set of assumptions, a common set of understandings, allow the player, one, to jump right into the game and start playing without having to read the manual or try to understand where we were coming from. And it also allowed the player, I think, to feel comfortable and smart and intelligent and capable in this world. So using history as a resource, using the real world as a resource, whether it was in terms of how railroads worked or whether tanks might be a good thing or electricity would be good to discover or the wheel could come in handy sometime, having those common shared concepts in a game made the game easy to start playing and I think comfortable. So using history, finding then parts of history that were kind of turning points, perhaps, or interesting in a way that were, I guess, significant would be kind of a general way of the era of railroads was significant. It changed our country. Pirates, not so sure, but certainly the history of civilization is something that feels important. And
you could say it had an impact, yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other key is to put the player in a role that they probably don't have in real life, but feels like somewhat aspirational. That to lead a civilization, to be a pirate, to manage a railroad empire. Those are things that most people don't get to do in their real life, but sound like they could be fun and exciting and rewarding. And that we have another one of our mantras is make it epic. It doesn't cost any more. So if you're gonna tackle a topic, take the epic approach. If it's history, why not 6,000 years of history? Might as well do that. If it's railroads, let's cover this whole continent with track. If it's pirates, a whole lifetime as a pirate. So we kind of take that make it epic approach to our topic and say, well, here's the topic. What's kind of the most epic way we can bring it to life?
That presents a really interesting dilemma, I suppose, in terms of brief and scope, because if you're using these advantages conferred by making games about real life topics, about real history, as you say, you've got a common level of understanding of those things that people can jump into the games with. But with that common understanding comes a certain expectation of fidelity to the real, right, as to what happened. But at the same time, if you are making a game about 6,000 years of history, and unless you've got 6,000 years to make it, there's got to be some level of abstraction. You can't be entirely realistic. So I'd be interested to hear about where you set your sort of comfort points with that, where you say, well, this isn't realistic, but hey, it wouldn't be fun or possible if it was.
Yeah, I've seldom had players ask for more realism or more detail or more micromanagement. I'll use that pejorative term. It's really finding when we putting the player in this role. Like if you're the leader of a great civilization, you're not going to deal with every tiny little detail. You're making the big picture decisions. So that kind of makes sense. Again, if you're running the railroad, you're not going to run every train. You're going to, so the level of detail is appropriate to the role that we allow you to take on. And as we make it epic and as we put you kind of in the most fun, most interesting position in this world, the scope and the detail of what you're going to do kind of defines itself. And we make sure that, it's a manageable set of things. But no, we're not trying to duplicate with extreme fidelity every detail of history. And the fact that we're inviting you to tell your own story already means that we know we're going to diverge from that path. So wasn't even worth trying. You're gonna create your own story. So there's no reason for us to try to duplicate history. And in fact, some of the times when what happens in your game diverges from history are some of the most interesting times. Of course, the Gandhi meme is is kind of well known with civilization now, and it's very memorable when Gandhi acts in a way that's kind of out of character. We're not. Had we tried to create exactly the historical Gandhi, those things would not have happened. But because we're allowing the story to go where you take it, some of these kind of memorable things will happen, and that's just part of the design of the game.
So, looking at your own tendencies, I suppose, do you veer towards too much detail or too much abstraction? And not just in terms of sort of historical detail either, but do you overcomplicate or do you oversimplify? Because most designers I've met tend to drift in one direction or the other.
I would like to think that I overcomplicate and then course correct. I think it's kind of a natural tendency as you work on a game. Once you've become comfortable with the basic elements, you say, "Oh, now it needs a little more of this," or that you gradually lose sight of that early play experience, and the tendency is to perhaps add too much because you've already experienced all of the initial things. And so trying to keep that kind of initial experience in your head, even if you've gone beyond it, is part of design, I think. And also having other voices, other people playing, feedback from others is helpful there. But I think without overcomplicating and then pulling back, you might not discover some really interesting things. Perhaps this new complication is so interesting that we're going to take something out that is not as interesting. So it's a kind of a constant trade-off of what are the most fun and interesting pieces that the player are going to not overwhelm the player but interest the player. Because a game like Civ, it's essential that the player is not trying to figure out what's happening, what just happened, but is projecting into the future what they're going to do next. So there's a certain level of kind of complexity and detail that allows that to happen. That the player is able to kind of keep in their mind the key components of their strategy, and then decide what they're going to do next based on that, and not spending a lot of time trying to figure out what just happened. If there's too much to worry about, then the player's more guessing at what to do next as opposed to owning what's going to happen next.
So those moments where a potentially superfluous, maybe experimental bit of design then went on to not only become important to a game, but kind of beloved by its players. Has that ever surprised you? You thought, well, I nearly didn't even start to explore that avenue, and now look, it's what people kind of really like about it. Have you ever had times like that where something just came out of the smallest place and then surprised you?
A few times, I think with Civ 2, for example, Brian Reynolds really introduced the idea of modding and people creating their own scenarios and being able to change the rules. And I was very skeptical of that at the time. And, I was like, well, Civ is perfect. Why would anybody want to change a rule or change this or change that? But that turned out to be a very important part of the Civ story. the Civ community and kind of the longevity and the vitality of civilization. A lot of that is in the modding community and things like that. And I remember Brian also put in this cheat feature, like you could add a unit wherever add a unit right over here, add a tank over, you could kind of in the middle of the game add some extra units if you weren't doing all that great. And I was like, Ryan, that's going to totally disrupt the balance of the game. And he had it like as one of the key menu elements: load game, save game, cheat. And I was like,
oh wow,
don't give the player that. Don't give the player that temptation. And then one day I was watching my son play, and he was popping these tanks all over the place, and had this huge smile on his face and was having just the greatest time. And I said, I was like, oh, okay, maybe there is something to this. Maybe there's more than one way to play this game, and it doesn't have to be played exactly the way I would play it. So that was a surprise.
Looking at sort of the way, I suppose that modding certainly is fascinating in terms of the way games evolve based on what their players want and how they like to play them. And there it's, of course, taken into the player's hands to a certain extent. But something that I don't think really existed, for until really the last sort of 10 years at the outside is early access, and that sort of iterative design process that's open to consumers. And I'm interested to hear, you must have thought how your early games, a lot of the games you've made would have played out and how they might have looked different if they'd been open early access releases. Because, of course, strategy and, is a huge area for early access games. So I could quite well imagine something like Pirates being an EA title.
Yeah, I think we probably would have taken advantage of that. I mean, we kind of had early access within our company that different people were playing. We're getting a lot of feedback, et cetera, for our games. That's always been our goal, is to have something playable very early and then evolve it, prototype it early, iterate on the game design, even up till a week or two before we ship. So we've always kind of embraced that idea of considering as many possibilities as we can and getting as much feedback as we can. Now early access is kind of a way to involve the entire community in that. I think that it is. I guess I'm not sure what the trade-offs are for a game like Civ, or we have some outside testers and things like that help us there. There are perhaps some risks of exposing it early. I'm not really sure, but the fundamental idea of early testing and prototyping and evolving, we're certainly on board with. We get lots of suggestions on our in our forums, et cetera. It's the community is very, very active. I think it's a positive development. You have to kind of be in a slightly different production mode, I think, to make that happen. And with games that kind of have pretty high expectations, I think there are some risks involved. But overall, I think it's a positive development.
I think one of the potential pitfalls, certainly not for a player, is that unless you're really disciplined from the outset, it can be kind of hard to know when a game's finished, especially when there's a near limitless potential scope for it. How do you know when to stop? And I don't know. I mean, have you ever felt that pressure in a game that's had a planned shipping date, where you just worried that you kind of never stop adding things to it?
I often. I am capable of stopping, and I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I've exhausted my supply of new ideas, and there'll come a point where every new thing you try doesn't work, and you realize, okay, maybe what we've got here is the best, best possible thing, and I've got to slow down. The other thing is sometimes there'll be another idea on the horizon that it's kind of like, okay, I'm kind of ready to move on to this other topic. So yeah, I could keep, if I had nothing else to do, I could keep working on this, or gilding the lily, as it were. But hey, here's a new idea that I'd like to start working on, and I probably already have started working in my free time on, and it's time to turn this into a full-fledged project. So it is, I've never kind of,
when to quit.
I like to think that, yes.
We spoke earlier about the pleasure you've had in seeing the Civ series sort of continue to roll on in different guises, and to longevity was the word you used. But even beyond the distinct series itself, I suppose the template that Civ did a lot to form has spread a lot wider now. So in a way, I suppose you're seeing that same heritage in a lot of games that can't trace any direct lineage to you or any people you've worked with. I suppose we'd call that the 4X genre. And I think it's a good term, but I'm not certain about it. Do you think 4X is the right term for that kind of game for a start?
I think it's close enough. I think, the idea of turn-based, of a very broad perspective of different systems, a military system, a science system, an economic system, political system, though the integration and interaction of those kind of things doesn't have to be exactly that, but exploration. I think those are, maybe not all the X's have to be exactly there, but it's that kind of perspective, that idea, that pace. I think those are characteristic of that genre, and it is kind of surprising in hindsight to see that, because when Civ first came out, it was not expected to do well. It was all the things that games kind of were not supposed to be at the time. It's hard to imagine, but strategy was a dirty word at the time, and you didn't want to call your game a strategy game because they were boring and slow moving, and then they had so to see the lifetime of it and the evolution of it has been gratifying, and to see others work with the model, it's also gratifying to see all the possibilities that were kind of encapsulated in that initial design.
What's interesting, I mean, recently, for example, there's Humankind that I've been really interested in following. Soren Johnson, of course, with Old World. Both games I've enjoyed in their early stages, and I think they're their own things. But what I've been aware of very much in both of their designs is how they're consciously setting out to differentiate themselves from at least some of the core mechanics of Civilization, while still accepting that, there are some lines of best fit for 4X as a whole. Now, obviously, not looking to talk specifically about those games, but looking at the future of 4X, or as you say, a broad sort of top-down perspective with different systems. How much flexibility for innovation is there in that? And I'm not sort of saying that in a flattering sense, say, how could you improve on Civ? But like, how much evolutionary variety is there looking out from Civ? Or is that just is it time to just look at other types of broad strategy games? It's not like there aren't other ideas.
Right. Well, that's a problem that we face every day. You know, what do we do with Civ? What is the next Civ going to look like? How do we improve on this series? How do we, where do we go from here, basically? And we believe there's a lot of life left in the Civ series. There's a lot. I mean, the topic is obviously so rich and varied, but mechanics, visually, there's a lot we can, as the technology improves, in terms of communication and multiplayer. I mean, there's a lot of areas that the series, I think, can move into and take advantage of. Where, I think as players have become kind of comfortable with the system, we can then build on that and add some new things that perhaps in the with the early Civs people were still getting comfortable with. Okay, this is the way a unit moves. This is because you have to kind of have an idea of where you're going with Civ. What type of victory perhaps are you pursuing? How important is it for me to explore? How many different wars can I get into at one time? So until you have a kind of an understanding of those things, we can't layer too many other things on top of that. But I think now we can start to explore some new ideas and shake things up a little bit. But the topic is so rich, and different designers, as you mentioned, have different perspectives and ways of deciding what's important, what's not as important, and where am I going to invest my energy in terms of design. So I think there's a lot of life left in the world of civilization.
What are you playing yourself right now?
I am playing. I spend most of my time making games because I find that at least as much fun as playing, if not more. But so when I play, I kind of perhaps go for a different genre. I like racing games, for example. I've been playing also Overland, which is kind of a nice little, fun way to spend a few hours solving some fun little problems. I was playing. I have the Xbox Live subscription, so you can do a lot of sampling of games. I was playing a game called Fire in the Flood, which is a pretty kind of atmospheric story game. Again, these are different from what I'm kind of working on, but are fun to see what else is out there, what other styles, what other genres and approaches are happening. So,
do you enjoy playing strategy games, or is it kind of a busman's holiday to some extent?
It is a bit of a busman's holiday, and I'm my mind is full of whatever I'm working on in terms of the mechanics and the elements, and to kind of move that out for a whole new set of strategy elements, I think would be kind of painful. So when I play, I'll probably play something that's not gonna ask me to make the demands on my brain space that a strategy game might.
So I said earlier I wanted to talk about science fiction again before we were done, which is talking about broad topic areas. I guess the only thing broader than the whole history of mankind is the whole potential history of stuff that hasn't happened yet. I mean, there's there's a huge amount of ground to cover there. What are the... Obviously, we've seen you tackle science fiction themes before, but what are the common tropes in science fiction, I guess, that you think are particularly ripe for... I'll try and say that word again. Exploration. You would think one of the ones in 4X. I don't know how to say it. But yeah, where's potentially the unexplored stuff as well that hasn't been done to death? Where are the real gold mines in sci-fi design?
That's a tough one for me, because I think you mentioned we have tried a few things, and often we've tried to map kind of a science fiction skin over some kind of familiar ideas. I mean, Masters of Orion was kind of civilization with a skin on it. Starships, kind of a squad-based tactical game with starships, but still a map and kind of those elements. So we kind of fall back, I think, to those things that we're familiar with and comfortable with. Even if it's science fiction, we will kind of take familiar trade-offs, decisions, concepts, and put like a science fiction spin on them. I'll have to mention the game, but Beyond Earth, sorry. Again, kind of Civ-based. So that's where we are, XCOM also, projects into the future, but with weapons and tactics and things that are kind of familiar and understandable. So we very much believe in this idea of using concepts that the player will already be familiar with. We're not primarily storytellers to amaze you with our story. It's kind of letting you tell your story in a world where you feel you're comfortable and in control. So science fiction is something we've dabbled in, but often is not the kind of core of what we're doing.
Well, it's interesting there because it sounds like there's almost a strength in sticking to, well, not like cliche, but like established stuff. Like a plasma weapon, pretty much what that does, right? Mm-hmm. It's not something weird and out there. It's an analog for something that's real. So it's interesting. It's more of an aesthetic choice in a way, the sci-fi thematic territory, rather than sort of a way to bring in really weird mechanics and stuff like that. You're almost in a way still looking at the principles you make the historical games on, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. We want the player not to have to deal with, every element of this game is unfamiliar and new, and I've got to figure out how it works. That's not the kind of game we're trying to design. I mean, that could be interesting, but if we want you to kind of own what's happening and direct it and think into the future, you've got to kind of be comfortable with the basic elements, and that's our kind of approach to a topic, even if it is futuristic.
Looking at the influence your games have had, and we've talked about that propagating way beyond games that you or Firaxis have made. If there was one convention, I guess, that you had introduced into the broader gaming ecosystem that you could take back, if there's one thing you thought, okay, that was fine, but it's gone too far, or I wish this wasn't in everything, or I thought other people would come up with new ways to do this, like, what's your biggest regret, design-wise?
Wow, I thought that question was going to go in a different direction, but I was thinking, okay, what are the things that I'm really proud of? And then it's like, no. So I'm going to have to say the word Tycoon.
Beloved of budget bends everywhere. Yeah.
We thought that was a clever name for a railroad tycoon, and I guess it was, because it became very, very popular.
Yeah, it's had a bit of a pedigree, that name. Yeah, to say the least.
I think it kind of defined these economic building sandbox-ish, kind of what railroad-ish was. But I don't know if we could have patented it or copyrighted it or whatever, but it became very popular. If I had a nickel for every Tycoon game out there,
yeah, you'd be a Tycoon game tycoon, right. I guess.
That's right, exactly.
So to finish us off and to carry on the theme of looking at the wider genre that your games exist in. In fact, it's interesting, the whole idea of genre, and it would be interesting if we had more time to speak about how genre became a thing in games and maybe arguably is becoming less of a thing now as people become more experimental. I suppose if we use strategy in its widest sense as a genre, it feels a little bit like these games are having a bit of a golden age at the moment. You could argue that we could use some more fresh RTS games, but in general, it's a good time for strategy games. I suppose I'd be interested in your take on why that is, and and where that very broad church of games is headed from here?
Well, it's actually interesting to me that strategy is appended to so many genres. I mean, there's real-time strategy and turn-based strategy and card game strategy. It's kind of like strategy is the universal solvent. Because I think of those as very different genres: real-time strategy versus turn-based strategy. Those to me are not the same genre at all. So the fact that we can add strategy just about anything to make it taste better is interesting to me because, as I mentioned back in the early days, strategy was a bad thing. But where things are going, I think that we're seeing, as you mentioned, Humankind and Old World and the things that we're working on, other companies, that genre is a positive in some ways, in that it allows you to build upon an understanding, a player's understanding. For example, in an RTS, you kind of know what the different keys on the keyboard do. In an action game, which joystick is going to be look and which is going to be move. We have these conventions that allow players to jump right into a brand new game and again feel at home. So there's a power to these genres. I think that is valuable. But then stretching them is where designers come in and where the future lies. I think you could almost permute any two historical card game. You can almost take any two concepts and combine them together and see what happens. And that's the power of computers and gaming and kind of where we are. But as far as where we're going exactly, I don't really have. I can't predict. But what I've seen is, you mentioned experimental. There's an explosion of types of games and genres and approaches to game as the gaming audience grows, worldwide. So that I think we'll continue to see just an amazing variety of games and get to enjoy that.
When you said that RTS and turn-based strategy are very different things, I, of course, I agree with you to a pretty large extent there, but I know I said that was my last question, but this is super interesting. Do you not think there's a case for categorizing games rather than the type of input, I guess, and the skill it takes to be good at them? Because, Civ doesn't need reaction times. Your APM doesn't matter. But is there not a case for saying that the type of pleasure you get out of them, the sort of satisfaction they give you, there is some commonality? I think a lot of, the sense of order and self-tending complexity that you get with something like Civ is kind of comparable to seeing all of your little guys going to and fro from lumber camps in Age of Empires, say. Is there any sort of merit to categorizing games like that? Possibly,
but once I started seeing these expert StarCraft players with their order of shortcut keys and order of operations and strategies all mapped out, I kind of came to a different conclusion, that there was a very different kind of satisfaction. It was a very different kind of skill that was being applied there than skill at Civilization, for example. So I think that, you can look at both sides of that. Yes, we try to boil it down to interesting decisions and owning the story. I think those things are common and a part of a good game. But then at a certain point, things can diverge in very different directions.
Yeah, you don't hear people boasting about having sort of 180 actions per minute in Civ 6, I guess. It's a different ballgame.
Very true, very true.
Speaking of which, finally, I already tried to trick you into talking about the potential next Civ a bit. Is there any clue you can give us on what may or may not be happening on a new Civ title?
All I can really say is we love our community. We love our gamers. We love our Civ players. We appreciate all the input and ideas that they send to us, and they're the reason we're still around here. And we certainly feel it's part of our duty to keep them happy and appreciate their support for us. And we have nothing specific to announce at the moment. But
I figured it was a long shot.
But we do appreciate the fans and the players, and like to take this opportunity to thank them, because they are the reason we're still here.
Well, thank you for your time, and I guess for all the games as well. It's certainly occupied very, very, very many hours of my life. So, thanks to you, and on behalf of everyone watching. If we were in a normal world, in a normal place, they would all be clapping now.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you very much, Sid. And of course, I believe you have a memoir coming out soon as well, which I've had a pleasure of an early look at.
That's true. Kind of the behind-the-scenes stories of a lot of the games that we talked about. In a way, my career goes almost back to the origin of our industry, and I thought it might be a good time to kind of put some of those stories in writing, and for this kind of a new generation that has always had computer games and it's not familiar with the time when there were no games, where we had to actually make them, and that's kind of where I started. So there's a book with a lot of those great stories in it.
Well, thanks very much. And if you could make that dinosaur game next, I'd appreciate that.
All right, I'll work on that.
All right. Thanks, Sid. Bye-bye.
Thank you.